So, it's difficult to objectively say which subway system is the best. You can, for example, say that cleanliness is the most important thing. Or you can say a subway system is judged by the quality of its artworks. But stay with me, and I'll try to convince you why I think when it comes to public transportation, Hong Kong is the undisputed king of the world. First, let me ask you this. What's the point of public transportation? It needs to be public, right? Which I think can be measured by the percentage of the local population who use it. You know the saying that a developed country is not a place where the poor have cars, but a place where the rich use public transportation? With that in mind, now consider that public transportation in Hong Kong has the highest modal share by percentage in the world, at 77 or 87%, depending on the survey, which means 77 to 87% of all the trips taken by anyone in Hong Kong is either taken on a bus or the subway or a streetcar and so on. For comparison, that number, it's about 32% for New York City, 44% for Singapore, 51% for Tokyo, and 59% for Paris. So Hong Kong is truly in a league of its own. So the public transportation in Hong Kong is good at being public. Is it good at being transportation? This is trickier to quantify, I suppose. Just look at how efficient, say, for example, it is to take the subway compared to taking a taxi to go from the airport to the main business district. In Hong Kong, on a regular Monday, to go from the airport to Central, it will cost you about 30 minutes on a taxi and 37 minutes on the subway. In New York, again, on a regular Monday, to go from JFK to Times Square will take you about an hour in a cab and perhaps a bit over an hour on the subway. In London, to go from Heathrow to Covent Garden, it will take you well over an hour on a taxi. And 41 minutes on the subway? That's pretty good, actually. Isn't the Elizabeth line in the news recently? I remember seeing it in the news in Hong Kong. I wonder why. Oh, that's why. Now you may say the example I picked isn't fair, because if you look at the geography of Hong Kong, specifically the road network of Hong Kong, you don't have to punch through any kind of city traffic to get from the airport to downtown. That's correct, but I'm afraid that's the point. While traffic jams do exist in Hong Kong, of course, it doesn't exist nearly at the same scale as they do in any other megacities like LA or London or New York, because urban sprawl do not exist in Hong Kong at the same scale as they do in these other megacities, because they cannot exist because of this thing that I want to talk about in this video, which is the tyranny of geography. To talk about the urban planning history of Hong Kong, like any other city, is to talk about the history of Hong Kong. To start, you need to consider the colonial and immigration history of Hong Kong, and also how the MTR, which is the subway company of Hong Kong, basically gets to call all the shots when it comes to which piece of land gets developed. You can watch my video on birthday cake developments if you want to learn more. But none of these things by itself is entirely unique to Hong Kong. So, is it the combination of all these things that I said about immigration history and also how transit-oriented development is valued by the local population. No, I think that would be lazy. Because I think Hong Kong is unique in a way that it's something that cannot be replicated anywhere else, which is how Hong Kong's population is geographically constrained in a way that naturally favors public transportation. Hong Kong isn't an organically grown city. What I meant by that is before the Brits took over Hong Kong, there were maybe 10,000 people living there. And while it's difficult to find hard data on the population because Hong Kong wasn't its own census area until the Brits came in, it's safe to assume that the population here hovered in tens of thousands for quite a while. I did manage to find census data from 1573 for the Sun On County, which includes modern-day Hong Kong and Shenzhen. And the population then was about 34,000 people. Today, Hong Kong's population is 7.5 million people. So my point is, without these political and like artificial, let's call it artificial elements, Hong Kong isn't supposed to naturally have such a huge population. For one, there's no fresh water here, not really. We're too far away from the mouth of the Pearl River. And Hong Kong has no flat arable land for growing food other than a couple spots here and there. I mean, you can probably survive on a diet of mostly just fish, but that's kind of gross. Speaking of fish, Hong Kong does have a good harbor right here, with narrow straits on both sides and relatively calm and deep water. Perfect for giant opium boats to dock, for instance. And this is where most people would stop and say, oh, so that's why Hong Kong has such a crazy high population density and therefore a good public transportation system. No, I think that's still too simple. That's like saying Shaq is good at basketball because he's big. You're not wrong, but it's also not very particularly insightful. There are about 7.5 million people in Hong Kong, living in an area comparable to New York City with its 8.5 million residents. But if you look at the two cities from above, it tells a very different story. Because of how mountains and valleys work, all the flat-ish buildable land in Hong Kong are arranged in these are basically these thin linear strips squeezed between the mountains and the ocean. If you Google for the greenest cities in the world, you'll see a bunch of Western-centric cities with nicely manicured parks and gardens and stuff. For instance, you may see Vancouver, or Portland, or Vienna, or Copenhagen, or Singapore. And no disrespect to those cities, but in Hong Kong, we don't need to build gardens. We have jungles. We are the concrete jungle surrounded by actual jungles. After all, what's a more effective policy for greening and for preventing urban sprawl? Having really good policies, or just having huge mountains? I'd say mountains. And mountains are not only good at controlling sprawls, they're also really good at being mountains. Anyway, back to talking about transit planning. In Hong Kong, where you can build transit is essentially where you can build anything, period. You can say Hong Kong is the original linear city, like what the Saudis are trying to create in the desert. And you're never too far away from a major transportation artery, so to speak, unless you decide to go on a hike. To show you how naturally gifted Hong Kong is for a efficient public transit system, let's look at some other cities for comparison. Here's New York. Where would you put the subway lines? I mean, Manhattan may be straightforward, a couple lines going up and down like this. But then what do you do with Queens and Brooklyn? Now look at London. What do? Maybe like a web? But how do you decide where the tentacles should go? Now look at Hong Kong. How would you build the system here? Can you see the lines? Another here. Another one connecting the two. Maybe another line up here. Connecting everything with tunnels. And sure, a line out to the airport. And that's pretty much what the Hong Kong subway system looks like. This is why I think, although other Chinese cities are also very good at planning and building subway systems, because one, they're able to build out a network before the people move there because of the huge rural to urban migration that is well anticipated in advance. And two, because the Chinese government tends to have more tools on their belts when it comes to making large projects happen. But even if, say, you have a king who won't stop whining about wanting a better metro, and you're a planner with unlimited funds, I reckon you still can't design a system as sufficient as Hong Kong's. Of course, there are some notable side effects to this arrangement. Because of the power granted to the MTR when it comes to developments, the government didn't have to subsidize it for the kind of build first and they will come expansions. Instead, MTR will just buy the land and then build housing there before building the subway line, and then selling the condos with a huge markup because of the promised new subway line. So in a way, these developments are subsidized by investors and families who want to get in on the ground floor, so to speak. We call these people 開荒牛, which means kind of wilderness plowing ox. Sometimes these people are not volunteer buyers either. Sometimes they are people from the lower economic class who had been waiting for years for public housing and got assigned to like a new public housing project built by the government in anticipation for the new subway line. And sometimes, you guessed it, the new subway line will get delayed for years and years, and people will get understandably upset because they were left up a creek without a subway, so to speak. But side effects aside, I do think Hong Kong is the king of public transit planning. Although using the word king to mean the best seems a bit outdated. When was the last time you saw a king and thought to yourself, wow, what an embodiment of the best qualities a human being can have? So perhaps king should be used to describe something that is antiquated, something that should be replaced with something else that can better serve the people. Something like the public transportation in the US, perhaps. Jokes aside, I do think Americans deserve better transit systems. I really enjoyed the DC Metro when I lived there for 7 years. It wasn't that well run, but I was very grateful for it. In fact, it was part of the reason I chose to find a job and move there back in 2016. Maybe I'll talk more about US cities at another time. But until then, my name is Yu Yun, and thank you for watching.